Hey guys, David here and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to show you how and why I upgraded my RatRig Killerbee CNC from this Novoson NVEM controller to a Masso G3 Touch. At this point I also want to give a huge thanks to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. They make super high quality PCBs and have manufacturing services too, where you can get things CNC machined, 3D printed, all that good stuff. You can check out all of that linked down below. They also have the 6th PCB design contest going on, where you can submit your project and win some amazing prizes. Even just for participating, you get a Raspberry Pi Pico for free. You have time until the middle of January to submit your projects, so check it out now and participate. You have nothing to lose. Now, if you've been around on the internet in the same circles as I have, you've no doubt seen the Masso G3 Touch. It is not very new, but recently it has gained a lot of popularity. A bunch of YouTubers with CNC machines are upgrading to it, and well, I followed the hype. It is a completely standalone controller, meaning you don't need any computer attached to it. It runs its own operating system and it's the controller and for the CNC, so all of the stepper motor controllers get connected to it, as well as the interface all in one convenient module. It also is very easy to set up, like nothing compared to Mach 3, Mach 4 or all the other great options like Linux CNC. It took me half an hour to set up the software. But this does come at a price. Compared to this NVEM controller with an old laptop that you no doubt have lying around, this is an order of magnitude more expensive. But is it worth it? Now, in this video, I want to not just give you an overview of how I installed it. I will go very deep and nitpick about all the little details of this controller, because while there are a lot of videos on YouTube, I feel like a lot of them are not going as deep as I would like. I've also been using this controller for quite a bit of CNC machining already, so I do have a bit of experience with it and I know some of the quirks already. But first, why am I even upgrading? My setup worked pretty well with this NVEM controller. I have a nice touchscreen tablet hooked up to it with a keyboard. Now I was sharing that controller between my two CNC mills, and I'm possibly getting rid of one of them soon, so that was one of the motivations, but that was in no hurry whatsoever. But the real reason why I upgraded is that this controller, while it is great for the price and it is very configurable, Mach 3 is for no bad reason a standard, although it is ancient. Every once in a while during cutting, so like sometimes every 20 minutes, sometimes every hour, every 2 hours, this controller would just randomly cut out, freeze. This machine would stop where it is, not move anymore, not respond. And then 30 seconds, 2 minutes later, it would reconnect, and then sometimes e-stop there, because I hit the e-stop button in between, or it would start going off in a random direction because it completely lost track of where it is and where the code it was. That is an annoyance, and the best of days, a complete deal breaker a lot of times. If your CNC is not reliable, it means that doing a 1 hour fretboard inlay job, I can basically guarantee you that once or twice it's going to cut out, so I have to be close by and then re-home it and find again where in the code I need to start from. It was a big pain and maybe not want to use the CNC, so I knew it was time. But I could have upgraded to a different Mach 3 controller, which would have cost me a couple $100 instead of over 1,000. But the other thing is that there are quite a lot of features that I would have liked to have, some of which would have even made my job easier, like having homing properly set up where I home it every time and it auto squares it, and then I can reference that home position and have to basically not re-find my zero. I could have done that in Mach 3, it's just Mach 3 is kind of hard to use. And there are a bunch of random tutorials around, but depending on which exact board you have, it is all slightly different. So I never actually got around to setting it up. That is one of the reasons why I chose to go with the Masso, apart from it just being a unit that is completely disconnected, not relying on Windows and flaky connections, just feels great. But it is also so much easier to set up everything. Configuring all of the different options that I already had, plus a bunch of new ones, took me about half an hour on this machine, whereas just trying to research how to set up anything in Mach 3 would take me hours. But we are already getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk a bit about the installation. I think the Masso G3 Touch, which by the way, it also comes in a just G3, which is the same thing, except you do not get the screen, you just get the controller board and you can hook up your own screen, mouse and keyboard, which is also a great option if you don't want to use the touch screen, but this is a really nice unit and it's not that much more expensive. Like if you already have all the other things set up, then it might be a good option, but if you're going out buying monitors and stuff, then this is definitely the cheaper way. I think the design of it is quite clever. This box that you see here is the whole thing. You can simply undo these four bolts in the front and then it hinges out. I cannot do it at the moment anymore because I put some stuff next to it, but you'll see it here in the overlay. And then underneath you get the controller where you hook up all of your different connections. This means you can just mount this somewhere where it's easily accessible, and then you don't have to fiddle around in your electronics cabinet to hook up all of your different wires, because it's where your screen is, so where it is automatically easily accessible. It does mean that you might have to run some longer cabling runs, but it should not be too bad, and they do sell an optional extension kit that gives you a breakout board inside of your electronics enclosure that allows you to wire it more easily if your controller is a bit further away from the cabinet. It is kind of expensive and you can also make it yourself, but it is an option. Then you can of course hook up everything you would expect to be able to hook up to a CNC controller. It comes in 3, 4 and 5 axis variation. Now the hardware is the same for all of them, so it's just a simple software unlock. I'm using the 4-axis one since I have 4 motors that I want to control independently. For the which is now X-axis, I have 2 motors, and by controlling them independently I can automatically square the gantry every time I home. So I paid for the 4-axis option, but the good thing is that the upgrade to do it later on is the exact same price as it would cost more in the beginning, so you can just get the 3-axis. If you need 4 or 5 axis, just pay the $50 upgrade. It's the same price no matter when you get it. Apart from that, you have a bunch of input-outputs. You can control spindles and all kinds of other stuff. I'm using it, of course, on a 3-axis mill, but it also supports plasma cutters, it supports lathes, and a bunch of other weird configurations. You can even have multi-head machines and lasers attached to your CNC, a bunch of other stuff. Some of those need an extra software upgrade, but all of them are fairly reasonably priced. Now, I have hooked up a couple CNC electronics before, so it's not that new, but their documentation is actually great. All of the steps are laid out how to wire everything with different controller examples, different stepper motor drivers, various VFDs. I think there's like half a dozen or more VFD examples of how exactly to wire them up. All of that is in their online documentation, which is great. It's very thorough, and every single functionality is documented. That is one of their great strengths. They also have an AI assistant that basically is a glorified search function that if you don't want to find from the dozens of pages how you hook up the inductive limit switches, you just type that in, it scrapes the repo and gives you the answer right away. It works quite good for everything that is written there, and everything that is not written there I don't want an AI making up anyhow, so good job there. And if you still have other issues, you can of course reach out to the support, because it's not just some random AliExpress seller, it is an actual company that employs support staff. Now, I didn't try out how fast they are in with technical support, but just having some other questions for the support team, they answered in less than 24 hours with very competent answers. And I have no reason to believe that they would be any different if you have very specific support questions. Now, of course, do read the documentation first and don't just ask them about everything. They don't have a million employees. But having somebody that you can reach out to that can help you out is a great option that is just not available with a bunch of those cheapo Chinese controllers. I also went ahead and hooked up my old MPG, since it just has the connections for one to break out. There's no reason to buy a new one. They are all just switches and a little dial. Their one you can get from Masso has the connector already on it, but otherwise they're no different really. So I'm continuing to use this one. Now with the MPG, I will get into it more later, but the implementation on the Masso is definitely inferior to the one on the NVEM. I feel like on the Masso, this goes into software, and then the software sends the commands back to the controller. I don't know for a fact that that's how it is, but there's just ever so slightly of a delay, and you can easily, if you move the wheel a bit too quickly, have it not keep track of everything. Whereas on the NVEM, the MPG was king. Every single click would move the desired amount, and it would move it instantly, provided the motors can keep up. I think it even overrode the acceleration settings there, which definitely does not on here. But here, if I just kind of jiggle the wheel back and forth, it will move a little bit, but not really much. If I move it slowly or continuously in one direction, it works fine. But coming from a controller where I could really rely on those clicks, this I'm not a great fan of. But it completely does its job, and like, it's fine. Other than that, I've already alluded to that I've hooked up homing for everything, so I don't just have the 3 homing switches that came with the Killerbee, but I also added a 4th. This way, first when I do homing, which I do every time it starts up, you can activate it so that it notifies you to home every time, so the homing button blinks, and it's really hard to miss. This way I actually do home every time. So it first moves the Z up. Let's actually just do it. So to show you the homing, I'll just quickly do it. So first it moves the Z up until it hits the switch. Then the X-axis moves over. And finally the Y-axis also homes. Not really anything special, but it just works really well, and it tells you every time. And now that the homing is set up, all the soft limits are enabled by default, and everything is configured correctly, so I can go ahead, move around full speed, and not have to worry about crashing anywhere. Will just only move as far as it can, and it knows how far much further it can, so it will stop early enough so it can nicely decelerate. And I'm assuming you can also set it up properly in Mach 3, but I've had a host of problems, and then soft limits would suddenly turn themselves off and you could crash again. Not a fan. Here I can really rely on it, and it has worked perfectly. So now I'm already getting more into the weeds. If you just wanted the quick version, yes, I do like the Masso. Yes, it is expensive, but there's not really any other options that do what it does. It's easy to use and reliable, but it does have some quirks. If you just want something that's easy to set up and it works, get the Masso. If you have infinite time and you're great at tinkering and the CNC is going to be your hobby, go with Linux CNC. You can configure everything there, and you can have way more functionality for a lot less money. But now a bit more about the things I don't like as much. If you want to control 2 motors on one axis, if you are paying for 4 axes, then you would expect to be able to use those motors on either X-axis or Y-axis. However, the 4th and 5th axis, if you want to slave them to the axis, the 4th axis is always X and the 5th axis is always Y. I'm assuming that is somehow done in hardware because there's no software override for it. But that means that if you want to use 2 motors on the Y-axis, which is how I had it configured before with Mach 3, then you have to pay for 5 axes, not just for 4, even though you are only using 4 motors. There is no way to say that you want the B-axis but not the A-axis. That is just completely stupid in my opinion, and they should either make it so that you can choose which axis it is slaved to completely freely, or give you the option, if you buy 4 axes, to choose which one of the 2 additional axes you want. Especially the second one could definitely be done. I don't know their setup. Maybe the first one is actually a hardware limitation, but the second one could be done. I now have it changed that it's the X-axis and the Y-axis. It's fine, I just kind of need to relearn it in my brain, but that was a bit of an annoyance and really hard to kind of figure out why exactly it did not allow me to do that. This really ties over into a general theme of my petty grievances or small annoyances with this. It is great and it is very easy to use in the way that they intended to. Generally, the way they intend you use it is exactly what I would want to do, and it's really refreshing that you have the options that you need and none of the other clutter, and you don't need to go through 5 different menus just to be able to find what you wanted to do, even though that's the thing that almost everybody does. But if you wanted to do something that is not the standard way, or you want it to work differently, then you're just out of luck. If it has the option, great, you can activate the option. If it does not have the option, yeah, no. You can maybe put a request and maybe it comes in a future software update, but there's no way to really expand on the UI or change anything. It's all completely locked in. Now we can, of course, write G-code scripts that do stuff. That is an option, but for the UI, it's just how they envision it. Now, to show you a bit more about the UI, I'll get the camera in a bit closer, and then you can see a bit more. Alright, so here on the top you have the different screens. That is the same as it is in a lot of different CNC controllers. Here in Program and MDI, you just have your program here. You can do spindle, start, stop, feed, hold, all that good stuff, and you get your overview here. Then in jogging, you can jog the machine around, and you can also access all of the probing features here, which I've now also finally set up. I got one of those little touch probes. I haven't used it much yet, but this should allow me to do some proper probing. And then here you can of course move in continuous mode or in step mode, set your speed, and while you are in this screen, the MPG also works. Or does not, as just now. Great demo effect. I've had this issue once before, but I thought it was maybe a fluke. I'll have to investigate, maybe it's my connections. But right now the MPG is not really properly working. Could be my connections, that is very possible. But I already talked about the MPG. So let's stay here in the software. You always get this overview and you always get the on-screen keyboard in the vertical orientation. You can also use it in horizontal orientation. I believe then you don't get the on-screen keyboard and you have to use an external one, something like that. But you cannot just move it down to get more space here. Also here, for example, on the jogging screen, it's empty down here, and I would love to have the spindle control buttons here, for example, to turn on and off the spindle, because using this machine as kind of a manual milling machine sometimes, where I just jog around to maybe flatten the board, and it would be great to be able to turn on and off the spindle here instead of having to go over here, turn it off, and go to the other screen. It's fine, just a little annoyance. Then here in tools and offsets, you can set up all of your tools. This is especially relevant if you're using a tool changer, which this controller supports various different kinds, and I've seen a lot of people using them very successfully, and they're fairly easy to set up as well. For me, it does not matter as much. But here, down here, you also have your work coordinate offsets, and since I'm actually properly homing this machine, I can now make use of them. For example, when I was cutting this guitar fretboard, I first machined the fretboard itself in G54. This is the default one that you're always going to be using. But then I had to machine the inlays that I put in there, but I didn't want to lose my reference on the fretboard to be able to continue machining on it later. So I machined all of my little inlay pieces on G55 with a different offset, but it remembered the work coordinate offset for my fretboard. Then later I went back to G54 and I was able to finish machining, and even though I turned the machine off in between, I was able to rehome, and it got all of the locations again. Now doing this is only as accurate as your limit switches, and they're definitely not accurate down to the micron, especially not the little tactile ones, but for woodwork it's perfectly fine. All of this is possible in Mach 3 as well. It's just a lot harder to access. You have to jump through different menus and really know what you're looking for. Here it's just convenient way accessible. You have all of your stuff. You can go ahead and edit this and even give it names and stuff. It's just very easy. There's also a tab for conversational programming, where you can add some very simple little programs like face cuts, profile cuts, rectangular and circular pockets. These are very kind of limiting, but they're very easy to use. You just give it a title, you give it all of your important parameters here, your coordinates that you want to machine, and if you just want to face a simple board, you could use that. Finally, here in load file, that is where you load off in all of your files that you have created in, for example, Fusion 360. They are all stored on a little USB drive that you have to have plugged in. The controller itself does not have any permanent storage. It does save the settings permanently, but only with a battery. So you do have to, if you're shipping international, provide the battery yourself. It did not tell me that ahead of time. Luckily, I had something that kind of worked. Because without that battery, it will not let you do anything. But all the other programs, they're all saved on a USB drive. And I should definitely get a slightly more reliable one, since it is streaming from there. I think it does load some of the instructions into RAM first before it sends them out, but I've had it once where it's just kind of disconnected because it's a cheap drive and it stopped my program. You do also have the option of sending files over Wi-Fi to it, which works good most of the times. Sometimes it's a bit flaky, but then you will also just send it to the machine and it will be saved on the USB drive, so you still need to have that installed as well. And that transfer is quite slow. For small files that doesn't matter, but for larger like adaptive files it is very slow, and I end up just using it with the USB drive. You can also take screenshots and do some other stuff, but once again it's kind of slow. To edit or to look at your G-code, that is one of my other major gripes. Now editing is fine, you just select your G-code here. Let's maybe take one that is slightly smaller. You click here and then you get it here. You even have search replace, but you cannot just scroll here as you would expect. You have to just go page down and page up. That's the only way that you can scroll through it. And it works, but it can be a bit annoying. But you can do all of your little edits here. Then, however, when you get into here in your preview, this is your G-code preview, and coming from Mach 3 and 4, I can scroll through here, I can look at whatever I want. I have not found any way to scroll through here. Does not let you scroll like that, and the on-screen keyboard does not have arrow keys, which, by the way, it should. Even if it does not do that functionality, being able to go back and forth in text while typing would be great. But also I connected an external keyboard and it does not allow you to scroll through here. Same thing goes for the preview. The preview of everything that you see here is the one you get. There's no way to zoom in, there is no way to move around, and there's also no 3D preview. You have this depth map thing, but it's of limited use. It just kind of gives you a different view of it, but I've not really found that useful. Now, if any of this stuff is incorrect and I just have not found the right setting, please let me know down below. But I did not find any reference to it in the manual either. Those two are probably my biggest gripes about the controller setup. Being able to zoom in and really look at the lines closely, especially on a bigger design, would be great. And not being able to see your G-code, and later when it moves, when it starts counting, your cursor is down here, so you see maybe one future line. But not being able to see all the proper future lines is kind of you just flying blind. At the very least, the cursor should always stay up here. It also tends to freeze if you have a lot of fast G-code. The G-code flows through properly, no problem, but the preview here just kind of freezes up. Then if you want to start a program mid-program on any other software, I can just scroll to where I want and then select the line. Here I have to either know the line or I have to go into the edit mode to find the line, and then I can say here jump to the line and type in the line and then start running from there. Now this is annoying, but one good thing that this has that I don't think Mach 3 has is it scans all the code before that line and tells you that, oh, the spindle is turned on but not turned off, and all of these other things are changed. That way you can make sure that you have all of your stuff set up properly before you start from that line. But just having to know the line number makes it kind of useless. I end up just reposting the code instead of trying to start from a different place. Then the last screen that I've not showed you yet is the setup screen here. This is where you configure everything. Now, it's really nice to have this all in one screen, and it gives you a great overview and it's easy to find everything. One little petty grievance I have here is that now 3 things are highlighted. And for example, for the settings here on the left, that's not a menu that will pop up here, but those are different options. And it has now something highlighted, so you would expect to be able to open it. So you would press enter to open, but it does not. If I click on it, once again, the interface does not change, but now this is selected, and now I can open this. This is not a problem, it's just bad UI. Nothing should be highlighted here until I click on it, and then I can open it. Or I should be able to open whatever is highlighted. But then you, for example, I open the y-axis configuration here, you type in all of your things like distance per revolution, pulses, minimum feed rate acceleration, travel maximum, all of that good stuff. Nothing really special here. And you have all of your different options here for your spindle, for your homing. In homing, you can set up the order and all of your pull-off distances. So basically, you have all the options that you would expect here. Then for the inputs here, you can select an input, and then in the configuration, you can select what function it is used. One other nitpick here, if you want to invert the input, like here it says low-high, you would expect to be able to press on it somehow in the UI, because everything else allows you to do that. But the only way to invert it is pressing space. Once you know it, it's easy, but there's no visual indication for that, and it's just something I had to look up in the manual. But luckily, the AI tool there was really helpful. I was just able to ask how to invert it and told me, hey, press space, and it worked right away. Same thing here for the outputs. You can just go in, say what you want it to be. And for all of you that have sticked around for everything, I do have some little bonus tips for you that are not at all connected to this controller, but just some CNC stuff that I've been also doing lately. For one, I want to talk about this face mill here. I've only used it once so far, but I saw it on Instagram a bunch. OD Guitars, for example, uses them. It's a really great luthier if you haven't heard of him already, and he keeps raving about it, and I finally pulled the plug. It's kind of expensive. It's like 170 bucks for a face mill, but it is amazing. It cuts buttery smooth. It allows you to cut very big area with even a fairly weak spindle, and for flattening boards, for flattening your spoil board. I also use my CNC as a jointer planer. I don't have a jointer planer, but the CNC does it perfectly fine. And with this, I can cut, flatten down boards and get a very nice surface finish. And it just works beautifully. It's definitely worth the money. And then apart from that, I've gone back and forth on the spoil board what I think is best. At first I had a bunch of these T-tracks with small wooden slabs in between, and that was kind of a nightmare. Didn't use the T-tracks as much as I expected, and the wooden slabs were not fixed well enough and kind of too small to really use. Then I went back to just one big MDF board. Then I missed the T-slots. It was great, the MDF board. I was able to drill into it and fasten my work pieces there, but I wish to have a bit more slats. I ended up adding one slat to the end, which I used a couple times. But now I went back to a happy medium in between. I have 3 MDF pieces here, which, by the way, they make black MDF. It's a lot more expensive than the regular stuff, but they were out of stock, so I went for the black one, and it looks amazing. Where has this been all my life? But putting that aside, I now have 4 of those T-tracks, and I cut them to length nicely so I can use them better. And in between the MDF boards, where I can double-sided tape stuff down, where I can machine locating features and all of that. I've not surfaced it yet, which is why this machine still looks so clean. Once I surface this, it will be full of dust again. And I guess that's where the black MDF is gonna be a bit more painful, because it's a lot more visible. But I can so far highly recommend this setup. I've also gone ahead and further added more chip guards everywhere, because chips will build up everywhere in this machine. It's one gripe I have about the Killerbee is they have no chip management. Chips will just freely get into all of your linear guides and everything. Long ago I already added these little protectors here for the y-axis rails. It just makes it so that all the dust that jumps off of here does not land directly on the rails. It has to kind of go around, and that cuts down on the stuff that is on those rails dramatically. But here for the x-axis they're still exposed. A little bit less gets up here, but another thing that it would always get in behind underneath the machine, which is really painful to clean. So I now added panels everywhere to kind of block that off and make cleaning a bit easier. Well, that I think is all the bonus tips for today. And with that, once again, a big thanks to PCBWay for sponsoring this video, and a big thanks to you for watching. Make sure to go check out my other social medias down below, also my guitar Instagram, where I show you how I build guitars. I'm very active on there. And other than that, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you next time.